Om Namah Shivaya. Hey guys, welcome back to our e-teaching channel. Before moving into the chapter, I would love to thank the regular viewers for their kind support. Please do like our videos and share them. Comment your views on us to make us work better. Thank you. With no further delay, let's get into our chapter with a short brief of third chapter. The third chapter is She Enters His Life, where our hero Shiva meets his heroine and his soulmate Sati. He meets Sati in the Brahma temple, where Shiva saves Sati from an unfortunate trouble that she meets. Okay, now let's start with the chapter 4, Abode of the Gods. What? Who attacked you? Cried a concerned Nandi as he rushed towards Shiva to check his wounds. Relax, Nandi, replied Shiva. You are in worse shape than I am after your adventure in the water. It's just a few superficial cuts, nothing serious. The doctors have already dressed the wounds. I'm all right. I'm sorry, my lord. It's entirely my fault. I should never have left you alone. It will never happen again. Please forgive me, my lord. Pushing Nandi gently back onto the bed, Shiva said, There is nothing to forgive, my friend. How can this be your fault? Please calm down. Getting overworked will not do your health any good. Once Nandi had calmed down a bit, Shiva continued, In any case, I don't think they were trying to kill us. It was very strange. Us? Yes, there were two men involved. But who could these attackers be? Asked Nandi. Then a disturbing thought dawned on Nandi. Did the attackers wear a pendant with a crescent moon on it? Shiva frowned. No, but there was this one strange man, the best swordsman of them all. He was covered from head to toe in a hooded robe, his face veiled by a mask, the kind I have seen you people wear at that color festival. What is it called? Holy, my lord. Yes, the holy kind of mask. In any case, you could only see his eyes and his hands. His only distinguishing feature was a leather bracelet with a strange symbol on it. What symbol, my lord? Picking up a palm leaf booklet and the thin charcoal writing stick from the side table, Shiva drew the symbol of Om. Nandi frowned. This is an ancient symbol that some people use for the word Om. But who would want to use this symbol now? Om? Asked Shiva. My lord, Om is the holiest word in our religion. It is considered to be the primeval sound of nature, the hymn of the universe. It was so holy that for many millennia, most people would not insult it by putting it down in written form. Then how did this symbol come about? It was devised by Lord Bharat, a great ruler who had conquered practically all of India many thousands of years ago. He was a rare Chandravanshi who was worth respecting and had even married a Suryavanshi princess with the aim of ending our perpetual war. Who are the Chandravanshis? Asked Shiva. Think of them as the very antithesis of us, my lord. They are the followers of the kings who are the descendants of the moon. And they follow the lunar calendar. Yes, my lord. They are a crooked, untrustworthy, and lazy people with no rules, morals, or honor. They are cowards and never attack like principal Kshatriyas. Even their kings are corrupt and selfish. The Chandravanshis are a blot on humanity. But what does the Om symbol have to do with this? Well, King Bharat came up with this symbol for unity between Suryavanshis and the Chandravanshis. The top half in white represented the Chandravanshis. The bottom half in red represented the Suryavanshis. The part in orange coming out of the meeting of these two parts represented the common path. The crescent moon to the right of the symbol was the existing Chandravanshi symbol, and the sun above it was the existing Suryavanshi symbol, to signify that this was a pact blessed by the gods. Lord Bharat got a mandate for the pronunciation of this symbol as a holy word Om. And then what happened? As expected, the pact died with a good king. Once the influence of Lord Bharat was gone, the Chandravanshis were up to their old ways and the war began once again. The symbol was forgotten and the word Om reverted to its original form of a word without a written representation. But the symbol on the bracelet of this hooded man was not colored, it was all black, and the parts of the symbol did not look like lines to me. They looked like a drawing of three serpents. Naga! Exclaimed a shocked Nandi, before mumbling a soft prayer and touching his Rudra pendant for protection. Now, who the bloody hell are the Nagas? Asked Shiva. They are cursed people, my lord, gasped Nandi. They are born with hideous deformities because of the sins of their previous births. Deformities like extra hands or horrible mishapen faces, but they have tremendous strength and skills. The Naga name alone strikes terror in any citizen's heart. They are not even allowed to live in the Sapta Sindhu. The Sapta Sindhu? Our land, my lord, the land of 7 rivers, the land of Indus, Saraswati, Yamuna, Ganga, Sarayu, Brahmaputra, and Narmada. This is where Lord Manu mandated that all of us Suryavanshis and Chandravanshis live. Shiva nodded as Nandi continued. The city of Nagas exists to the south of the Narmada, beyond the border of our lands. In fact, it is bad luck to even speak of them, my lord. But why would a Naga attack me, or any Meluhan for that matter? Cursing under his breath, Nandi said, because of the Chandravanshis. What levels have these two-faced people sunk to, using the demon Nagas in their attacks? In their hatred for us, they don't even realize how many sins they are inviting on their own souls. Shiva frowned. During the attack, it hadn't appeared that the Naga was being used by the small platoon of soldiers. In fact, it looked to him like the Naga was the leader. It took another week for them to reach Devagiri. The capital city of the Meluhans stood on the west bank of the Saraswati, which emerged at the confluence of the Satluj and Yamuna rivers. Sadly, the Saraswati's flow was severely reduced compared to her once mighty size. But even in her abbreviated state, she was still massive and awe-inspiring, unlike many of the tempestuous rivers of the Punjab. The Saraswati was achingly calm. The river seemed to sense that her days were coming to an end. Yet she did not fight aggressively to thirst her way through and survive. Instead, she unselfishly gave her all to those who came to seek her treasures. The soaring Devagiri, though, was in complete contrast to the mellow Saraswati. Like all Meluhan cities, Devagiri too was built on giant platforms, an effective protection against floods and a sturdy defense against enemies. However, where Devagiri was different from other Meluhan cities was in its sheer size. The city sprawled over three giant platforms, each of them spreading over 350 hectares, significantly larger than other cities. The platforms were nearly 8 meters high and were bastioned with giant blocks of cut stone interspaced with baked bricks. Two of the platforms, named Tamra and Rajat, literally bronze and silver, were for the common man, whereas the platform named Swarna or gold was a royal citadel. The platforms were connected to each other by tall bridges made of stones and baked bricks, which rose above flat plains below. Along the periphery of each enormous platform were towering city walls with giant spikes facing outwards. There were turrets at regular intervals along the city walls from where approaching enemies could be repelled. This spectacle was beyond anything that Shiva had ever seen. In his mind, the construction of a city like this must truly be man's greatest achievement. Shiva's entourage rode up to the drawbridge across the field of spikes to the Tamra platform. The drawbridge had been reinforced with metal bars at the bottom and had roughened baked bricks laid out on top so that horses and chariots would not slip. There was something about the bricks he had seen across the empire that had intrigued Shiva. Turning to Nandi, he asked, "Are these bricks made as per some standard process?" "Yes, my lord," replied a surprised Nandi. "All the bricks in Meluha are made as per specifications and guidelines given by the chief architect of the empire." "But how did you guess? They are all exactly the same dimension." Nandi beamed in pride at his empire's efficiency and his lord's power of observation. The platform rose at the end of the drawbridge, with the road spiraling up to the summit in one gentle turn, facilitating the passage of horses and chariots. In addition, there was a broad flight of stairs leading straight up the incline for pedestrians. The city walls and the platform extended steeply onto the sides around this slope, making it a valley of death for any enemy foolish enough to attack the platform from this area. The city gates were made of a metal that Shiva had never seen before. Nandi clarified that they were made of iron, a new metal that had just been discovered. It was the strongest of all the metals, but very expensive. The ore required to make it was not easily available. At the platform entry, on top of the city gates, was etched the symbol of the Suryavanshis, a bright red circular sun with its rays blazing out in all directions. Below it was the motto that they lived by, Satya Dharma Man, truth, duty, honor. Seeing just this, much of the city had left Shiva awestruck. However, the sight that he witnessed at the top of the platform within the city gates was truly breathtaking, both in its efficiency and simplicity. The city was divided into a grid of square blocks by the paved streets. There were footpaths on the side for pedestrians, lanes marked on the street for traffic in different directions, and of course there were covered drains running through the center. All the buildings were constructed as standard two-storied block structures made of baked bricks. On top were wooden extensions for increasing the height of the building if required. Nandi clarified to Shiva that the structure of the buildings differed internally depending on their specific requirements. All windows and doors were built strictly on the side walls of the buildings, never facing the main road. The blank walls that faced the main roads bore striking black line drawings depicting the different legends of the Suryavanshis, while the background was painted in the sober colors of grey, light blue, light green, or white. The most common background color, though, appeared to be blue. In the Meluhan mind, blue was the holiest color of them all. It was the color of the sky. It was just above green, the color of the earth in the color spectrum. Meluhans, who liked to see some greater design in every act of nature, thought it was marvelous that blue was above green in the color spectrum, just as the sky was above the earth. The most recurring illustrations on the walls were about the great emperor, Lord Ram. His victories over his enemies, his subjugation of the wicked Chandravanshis, incidents that proved his statesmanship and wisdom, had been lovingly recreated. Lord Ram was deeply revered, and many Meluhans had come to worship him like a god. They referred to him as Vishnu, an ancient title for the greatest of the gods, meaning protector of the world and propagator of good. As Shiva learned from Nandi, the city was divided into many districts consisting of 4 to 8 blocks. Each district had its own markets, commercial and residential areas, temples, and entertainment centers. Manufacturing or any other polluting activity was conducted in separate quarters away from the districts. The efficiency and smoothness with which Devgiri functioned belied the fact that it was the most populous city in the entire empire. The last census, just 2 years back, had pegged the population of the city at 200,000. Nandi led Shiva and the 3 soldiers to one of the city's numerous guest houses, built for the many tourists that frequented Devgiri for both business and leisure. Tying up their horses in the designated area outside the guest house, the party walked in to register themselves and check into their rooms. The guest house had a style similar to the many that Shiva had seen throughout their journey. There was a central courtyard with a building built around it. The rooms were comfortably furnished and spacious. "My lord, it's almost time for dinner," said Nandi. "I'll speak with the housekeeper and have some food arranged. We should eat early and get enough sleep, since our appointment with Emperor has been fixed at the beginning of the second prahar tomorrow." "Sounds like a good idea. Also, if it is all right with you, shall I dismiss the soldiers and send them back to Srinagar?" "That also sounds like a good idea," said a smiling Shiva. "Why, Nandi, you are almost like a fount of brilliant ideas." Nandi laughed along with Shiva, always happy to be the cause of a smile on his lord's face. "I'll just be back, my lord." Shiva lay down on his bed and was quickly lost in the thoughts that really mattered to him. "I'll finish the meeting with the emperor as soon as humanly possible, give him whatever the bloody hell he wants, and then score the city for Sati." Shiva had considered asking Nandi about the whereabouts of Sati, but had eventually decided against it. He was painfully aware that he had made a less than spectacular impression on her at their first meeting. If she had not made it easy for him to find her, it only meant that she was not terribly stirred by him. He did not want to compound the issue by speaking casually about her to others. He smiled as the memory of her face came flooding back to him. He replayed the magical moments when he had seen her fighting. Not the most romantic of sights for most of men of his tribe, but for Shiva it was divine. He sighed, recalling her soft, delicate body, which had suddenly developed brutal, killer qualities upon being attacked. The curves that had so captivated him swung smoothly as she transferred her weight to swing her sword. The sober tied hair had swayed sensuously with each move of the sword arm. He breathed deeply. What a woman! It was early in the morning when Shiva and Nandi crossed the bridge between Tamra and Swarna platforms to reach the royal citadel. The bridge, another marvel of Meluhan engineering, was flanked on the sides by a thick wall. Holes had been drilled on the walls. Two shot arrows or pour hot oil on enemies. The bridge was bisected by a massive gate, a final protection just in case the other platform was lost to an enemy. When they crossed over to the Swarna platform, she was completely taken by surprise, not by the grandeur of the royal area, but by the lack of it. He was shocked by the fact that there was no opulence. Despite ruling over such a massive and wealthy empire, the nobility lived in a conspicuously simple manner. The structure of the royal citadel was almost exactly like the other platforms. There were no special concessions for the aristocrats. The same block structures that dominated all of Meluha were to be found in this royal citadel as well. The only magnificent structure was to the far right and sported the sign Great Public Bath. The bath also had a glorious temple to Lord Indra to the left. The temple, built of wood, stood on a raised foundation of baked bricks, its cupola plated with solid gold. It seemed that special architecture was reserved only for structures built for the gods or ones that were for the common god, probably just like how Lord Ram would have preferred. The only concession to the emperor, however, was that his standard block structure was larger than the others, significantly larger. Shiva and Nandi entered the royal private office to find Emperor Daksha sitting on a simple throne at the far end of the modestly furnished room, flanked by a man and a woman. Daksha, greeting Shiva with a formal namaste, said, "I hope your journey was comfortable." He looked too young to be an emperor of such a large country. Though he was marginally shorter than Shiva, the major difference between them was the musculature. While the strapping Shiva was powerfully built, Daksha's body showed that it had not been strained by too much exercise. He was not obese either, just average. The same could be said about his wheatish complexioned face. Average sized, dark eyes flanked a straight nose. He wore his hair long like most Meluhan men and women. The head bore a majestic crown with the sun symbol of the Suryavanshis, manifested in the center through sparkling gemstones. An elegant dhoti with an angavastram hung down the right shoulder, and a large amount of functional jewelry, including 2 amulets on his right arm, complemented Daksha's average appearance. His only distinguishing feature was his smile, which spread its innocent conviction all the way to his eyes. Emperor Daksha looked like a man who wore his royalty lightly. Yes, it was, Your Highness, replied Shiva. The infrastructure in your empire is wonderful. You are an extraordinary emperor. Thank you, but I only deserve reflected credit. The work is done by my people. You are too modest, Your Highness. Smiling politely, Daksha asked, May I introduce my most important aides? Without waiting for an answer, he pointed to the woman on his left. This is my Prime Minister, Kanakhala. She takes care of all administrative, revenue, and protocol matters. Kanakhala did a formal namaste to Shiva. Her head was shaved except for a tuft of smooth hair at the back which had been tied in a knot. She had a string called the janau tied across from her left shoulder down to the right side of her torso. She looked young like most Meluhans, but was a little overweight, as was clearly evident from the excess flesh she bore between the white blouse and dhoti. She had a dark and incredibly smooth complexion, and like all her countrymen, wore jewelry that was restrained and conservative. Shiva noticed that the second amulet on Kanakhala's arm showed a pigeon, not a very high chosen tribe amongst the Brahmins. Shiva bent low and did a formal namaste in reply. Pointing to his right, Daksha said, And this is my chief of the armed forces, General Parvateshwar. He looks after the army, navy, special forces, police, etc. Parvateshwar looked like a man that Shiva would think twice about taking on in a battle. He was taller than Shiva and had an immensely muscular physique that dominated the space around him. His curly and long hair had been combed fastidiously and fell neatly from under his crown. His smooth, swarthy skin was marked by the proud signs of long years in battle. His body was hairless, in a rare departure from the normally hirsute Kshatriya man who took body hair to be a sign of machismo. Probably to make up for this deficiency, Parvateshwar maintained a thick and long moustache which curled upwards at the edges. His eyes reflected his uncompromisingly strong and righteous character. The second amulet on his arm showed Parvateshwar as a tiger, a very high chosen tribe amongst the Kshatriyas. He nodded curtly at Shiva. No namaste, no elaborate bow of his proud head. Shiva, however, smiled warmly and greeted Parvateshwar with a formal namaste. Please wait outside, Captain, advised Parvateshwar, looking at Nandi. Before Nandi could respond, Shiva cut him. My apologies, but is it all right if Nandi stays here with me? He has been my constant companion since I left my homeland and has become a dear and trusted friend. Of course he may, replied Daksha. Your Highness, it is not appropriate for a captain to be witness to this discussion, said Parvateshwar. In any case, his service rules clearly state that he can only escort a guest into the emperor's presence and not stay there while a matter of state is discussed. Oh, relax, Parvateshwar. You take your service rules too seriously sometimes. Turning to Shiva, Daksha continued, If it is all right with you, may we see your neck now? Nandi slid behind Shiva to untie the cravat. Seeing the beads darned on the cravat to convey the impression that the throat was covered for religious reasons, Daksha smiled and whispered, Good idea. As Nandi pulled Shiva's cravat off, Daksha and Kanakhala came close to inspect Shiva's throat in a greater detail. Parvateshwar did not step forward but strained his neck slightly to get a better look. Daksha and Kanakala seemed clearly stunned by what they saw. The emperor felt the throat and whispered in awe, "The color comes from the inside. It is not a dye, it is true and genuine." Daksha and Kanakala glanced at each other, tears glistening in their astounded eyes. Kanakala folded her hands into a namaste and began mumbling a chant under her breath. Daksha looked up at Shiva's face, trying desperately to suppress the ecstasy that coursed through his insides. With a controlled smile, the Emperor of Meluha said, "I hope we have not done anything to cause you any discomfort since your arrival in Meluha." Despite Daksha's controlled reaction, Shiva could guess that both the emperor and his prime minister were taken aback by his blue throat. Just how important is this bloody blue throat for the Meluhans? None at all, Your Highness, replied Shiva as he tied the cravat bag around his neck. In fact, my tribe and I have been delighted by the hospitality that we have received here. I'm glad for that, smiled Daksha, bowing his head politely. You may want to rest a little bit, and we could talk in more detail tomorrow. Would you like to shift your residence to the royal citadel? It is rumored that the quarters here are a little more comfortable. That is a very kind offer, Your Highness. Daksha turned to Nandi and asked the captain, "What did you say your name was?" "My name is Nandi, Your Highness." "You two are welcome to stay here. Make sure that you take good care of our honored guest, Kanakala. Please make all the arrangements." "Yes, Your Highness." Kanakala called in one of her aides who escorted Shiva and Nandi out of the royal office. As Shiva exited the room, Daksha went down on his haunches with great ceremony and touched his head to the ground on which Shiva had just stood. He mumbled a prayer softly and stood up again to look at Kanakala with tears in his eyes. Kanakala's eyes, however, betrayed impatience and a touch of anger. "I did not understand, Your Highness," glad Kanakala. "The blue mark was genuine. Why did you not tell him? What did you expect me to do?" cried a surprised Daksha. "This is the second day in Devgiri. You want me to just accost him and tell him that he is the Nilkanth, our savior? That he has been sent to solve all our problems? Well, if he has a blue throat, then he is the Nilkanth, is not he? And if he is the Nilkanth, then he is our savior. He has to accept his destiny." An exasperated Parvateshwar interjected, "I can't believe that we are talking like this. We are Meluhans. We are the Suryavanshis. We have created the greatest civilization ever known to man, and some barbarian with no education, no skills, no merit is going to be our savior just because he has a blue throat?" "That is what the legend says, Parvateshwar," countered Kanakala. Daksha interrupted both his ministers. "Parvateshwar, I believe in the legend. My people believe in the legend. The Nilkanth has chosen Myrene to appear. He will transform all of India to the ideals of Meluha, a land of truth, duty, and honor. With his leadership, we can end the Chandravanshi crisis once and for all. All the agonies they inflict upon us will be over, from the terrorist attacks to the shortage of Somras to the killing of the Saraswati." "Then why delay telling him, Your Highness?" asked Kanakala. "The more days we waste, the weaker becomes the resolve of our people. You know, there was another terrorist attack just a few days back at a village not far from Haryupa. As our reaction becomes weak, our enemies become bolder, Your Highness. We must tell the Lord quickly and announce his arrival to our people. It will give us the strength to fight our cruel enemies. I'll tell him, but I'm trying to be more far-sighted than you. So far, our empire has only faced the morale-sapping influence of fraudulent Nilkanths. Imagine the consequences if people found out that the true Nilkanth has come but refuses to stand by us. First, we must be sure that he is willing to accept his destiny. Only then will we announce him to our people. And I think that the best way to convince him is to share the whole truth with him. Once he sees the unfairness of the attacks we face, he will fight with us to destroy evil. If that takes time, so be it. We have waited for centuries for the Nilkanth. A few more weeks will not destroy us. Do subscribe to our e-teaching channel for further interesting videos and audio books. Give us a thumbs up if you like our videos and share with your friends and family. Comment us to improve our work better. Thank you.